Good afternoon and welcome to a very special episode of The Angry Astronaut, coming to you sans sunglasses because today I'm going to be doing something extremely important, and that is trying to raise money to restore service to a 32-meter radio dish that's sitting right over my head here at the National Space Center just outside of Cork. This equipment has been out of commission for some time now and frankly is in danger of deteriorating completely and will be beyond restoring if we do not raise some funds very soon in order to preserve it. And then after that, it can be used for radio astronomy or interplanetary communications. A variety of different services may be possible with this radio dish. And again, I am going to be raising money for this project actually shortly after the release of this video, and I'm going to be live streaming for hours, so please tune in. And what I'm looking for is $5, €5, £5, whatever, from each and every one of you. Different than what I usually ask for. Usually I ask for support if you folks are in a easy position to do it, if it's financially easy for you to do it, that sort of thing. This is incredibly important. There are so many amazing things that this dish could do if it were restored to service, and I'm asking that if you are able to at all, a mere $5, €5, whatever a piece will make a massive difference given how many subscribers and how many viewers I have. All the details in the description, and make sure to follow along. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time talking about that. Let's get down to the topic at hand. So we have talked incessantly, or I have anyway, on this channel about SLS, about how flawed it is, about how overpriced it is, about how wasteful it is, especially given the fact that the whole damn thing, with the exception of Orion, is expendable. And really, for the most part, the NASA Office of Inspector General has been agreeing with assessment for some time. However, now, the Office of Inspector General at NASA has finally admitted that this rocket is not something NASA should be proceeding forward with, that their current plans to try to get the price point down, to get this rocket down to where it's more affordable, may not be achievable, at least not with the plans that they currently have, and they should be looking for other alternatives. Of course, the only viable alternative right now to SLS, at least if we're talking about getting large numbers of people and large amounts of cargo out to the moon, is of course Starship. But is that really the best solution? Is Starship really going to be able to carry the load? Is it going to perform as promised and live up to its potential? Or might there be some problems with Starship which holds up the process of becoming fully operational in a human-rated spacecraft, and that could in turn sabotage our efforts of returning to the moon?
And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
When I was less than half the age I am currently, I used to work for a company called MCI, selling competitive long-distance pricing to AT&T customers. And there was something I heard over and over again which really drove me nuts. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. There were many, many loyal AT&T customers who would absolutely refuse to switch their service, even though the quality of service was absolutely no different whatsoever, and the price was anywhere from 50 to 70% off of what these customers were currently paying. And this is the problem we have with SLS right now. Yes, it does work. It actually worked phenomenally well, putting a human-rated spacecraft into orbit around the moon for the first time in over half a century. So as far as its primary mission is concerned, that is to say, being a heavy lift rocket capable of carrying large payloads from Earth to the moon, well, SLS most definitely is not broken. However, in terms of doing it affordably, SLS is unquestionably broken and has been for quite some time. In July of 2022, as you may recall, NASA decided to put something into practice called the Exploration, Production, and Operations Contract with the objective of achieving, quote, a substantial savings of 50% or more off the current industry baseline per flight cost. However, NASA then assigned this contract to the two worst companies they could possibly assign it to, Boeing and Northrop Grumman. How the hell could you expect these companies, with no independent company to manage them, to achieve this 50% discount? It just isn't reasonable to think that they would be able to do that. And finally, a few days ago, the Office of Inspector General released a report confirming that it simply was not possible to get SLS down to an affordable price point. And if that's the case, Artemis is absolutely doomed unless we find another heavy lift rocket. And the Office of Inspector General had a lot to say about this topic. And they don't mince words. Quote, NASA's epoch strategy for SLS will fall far short of anticipated cost savings goal due to unrealistic assumptions. Under epoch, NASA's goal is to achieve a 50% cost savings in producing flight-ready SLS vehicles, reducing the contract cost of a single SLS Block 1B rocket from a current production cost of at least $2.5 billion per launch to $1.25 billion. According to agency officials, this goal is aspirational and not based on actual analysis, and in our estimation is highly unrealistic. Specifically, our review of current SLS contracts, affordability initiatives, and cost estimates for the Boeing-Northrop Grumman joint venture leads us to conclude that SLS production costs will remain at over $2 billion per rocket for at least the first 10 SLS launch vehicles under epoch. We examined current SLS contracts managed by NASA to project a baseline cost for a Block 1B rocket that will be built under epoch. We determined SLS contracts will collectively cost at least $2.5 billion for Artemis 4, not including additional tasks which will be added to epoch and therefore increase this baseline cost. Beyond the planned 3-year transition period, there's a 3-year period that NASA is going to have to implement in order to transition over to this private contract. Well, there will be an extended period of time before NASA fully transfers all SLS contracts over to this new contract. In our estimation, the $2.5 billion in production costs per vehicle will likely apply through Artemis 8. Although this contract will have the potential to start reducing costs beginning with subsequent renegotiation of its newly acquired subcontracts. So what does all of this mean? Well, here's the big problem as far as the expenses are concerned and just how ridiculously overpriced the whole damn thing is. First of all, you have the stages contract under Boeing, and that's for one exploration upper stage for Artemis 4, $482 million per rocket, and that's no engines, no capsule, no boosters, no nothing, just the damn stage for a total contract value of $9.7 billion. But it gets a lot worse than that. To restart the production of RS-25 engines, well, the cost for that per Block 1B launch is $582.7 million. $582 million for 4 RS-25 engines that Aerojet Rocketdyne has been building for decades. A total contract value of $3.6 billion. Let's drill down into that number just a little bit more. $582.7 million divided by 4 is over $145 million per engine. By way of comparison, SpaceX is charging NASA $178 million in launch services for the Europa Clipper spacecraft. That's an entire Falcon Heavy rocket with 27 Merlin engines, plus the launch services, plus the upper stage, plus everything else for $178 million. And even if you want to take this out of the realm of SpaceX and reusability and go for an expendable rocket, well, ULA charged NASA $243 million to launch the Perseverance spacecraft back in 2021. $243 million for an entire Atlas V plus the solid rocket boosters. An entire ULA launch is coming out to be less than 2 RS-25 engines. Clearly, Aerojet Rocketdyne is completely out of control, and they're not the only ones. In addition to that, Northrop Grumman is using 10 shuttle-era steel-cased boosters for Artemis 4 through 8, and then new composite boosters are only starting with Artemis 9, and yet the cost per Block 1B is $336.2 million, a third of $1 billion per launch. Once again, substantially more than the cost of an entire Atlas V, and the total contract value $3.2 billion. But there is one company who demonstrates that it is possible to deliver a component for this damn rocket at a relatively reasonable cost, and that is Dynetics. And I got an opportunity to see this component in person when I toured their facilities. By the way, that particular tour is linked at the end of this video. But $19.9 million for the universal stage adapter. And as you can see, this thing is actually pretty damn big, and in addition to that, it's composed out of some extremely advanced composite materials, and it's going to be providing the necessary cargo space for the Block 1B. And it's not just a big empty barrel, although it's a pretty damn big barrel that's about 8.5 meters in diameter at its largest point and over 9 meters long. Actually a pretty spacious area for cargo, and it can be used in conjunction with the Orion spacecraft, meaning that you can carry a substantial amount of cargo, say a habitat for the lunar surface, or the entire Dynetics Alpaca could fit inside this thing, in addition to carrying crew in the same mission. It is this capability of carrying co-manifested payloads that actually theoretically makes SLS a little bit more cost-effective if used properly. But unfortunately, because of the HLS contracts that NASA has awarded recently, one of the best things that SLS could be used for, well, it's not going to be used for that. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But the bottom line is the total cost for all of the exploration upper stage, that is to say, every single one of these things for every future Artemis mission that is in the current plan, is actually less expensive than a single exploration upper stage from Boeing. $19.9 million versus $482 million, or $406.2 million, that is, for all of the missions combined. There are companies that can come in at a relatively reasonable price point when encouraged to do so. Maybe they should just give the whole damn contract to Dynetics. So it's little surprise that the Office of Inspector General had this to say, quote, "While Boeing officials told us that they believe the 50% cost reduction goal under EPOC is achievable, based on our audit, we find such a goal infeasible. For example, the Boeing Stages contract. A major cost of producing the SLS's core stage is the large workforce required to build the system. Although Boeing's efforts to increase affordability include workforce reductions, bulk material purchases, and decreases of certain production lines from 3 shifts to 2, we have not identified significant cost reductions that would result from these actions. For example, Boeing reported a 13% reduction in workforce for building a core stage between the Core Stage 1 and Core Stage 2. Given the transition from the development of the time-intensive Core Stage 1 to additional core stages, we would have expected a greater workforce reduction. In addition, Our analysis of the company's budget reporting and financial management documents indicate that Boeing will continue to employ a large workforce and therefore have minimal cost reductions. And then Aerojet's RS-25 restart and production contract. That's even worse. Despite initiatives aimed at cutting costs by gaining manufacturing efficiencies, utilizing 3D printing, and using less costly materials for RS-25 engines, we instead found cost increases for future engines. For example, while NASA continues to claim a 30% reduction in RS-25 engine costs compared to those produced during the shuttle era, we estimated the per-engine cost for SLS will exceed the $104.5 million cost per RS-25. Moreover, our analysis identified a 13% increase in the RS-25 restart and production contract cost to date. NASA's cost savings calculation excluded overhead and other associated costs with recertification, industry-based restart, and production efforts for 24 new engines. The Office of Inspector General then goes on to list NASA's initiatives to achieve their cost reductions and why they're terrible ideas. Number one, to employ ongoing affordability initiatives by reducing workforce, increasing efficiencies with manufacturing processes, and using fixed-price contracts. That's the idea. However, the results, according to their audit, is there are cost increases in large contracts. Specifically, major contracts are still cost plus, and there is no commitment to agree to a fixed price contract which would help lock in savings. In addition, NASA has a plan to increase flight rate to 2 flights per year to affect economies of scale. Problem with that is there's a lack of customers outside of NASA. Due to the high cost of SLS, even the Department of Defense and other entities have not shown an interest in using SLS when commercial alternatives are more cost effective. And finally, NASA plans to transform SLS procurement strategy from a NASA-owned system to a commercial services contract. However, due to a lack of competition and the use of sole source contracts with the SLS, NASA may struggle to negotiate contract terms. Boeing historically has increased costs under their contracts. So what's the solution here? Well, the obvious solution is to dump SLS and go with Starship, right? Right? Well, maybe. Here's the problem. Starship is incapable of reaching the moon without a lot of low Earth orbit refueling, a process that we still don't know is going to work perfectly. Granted, low Earth orbit refueling is an absolute essential to the affordable and efficient exploration of the solar system, but until we know that we can do this effectively and efficiently and affordably, it's kind of a bad idea to go exclusively with this type of solution. NASA has put themselves in a tight spot already by relying exclusively on SpaceX and their HLS contract to put humans on the moon in the first place. As we all know, Starship hasn't made it to orbit yet, let alone carry out its first refueling mission, to say nothing of these 6 to 12 refueling missions that will probably be required in order to make lunar Starship capable of transporting astronauts down to the lunar surface and then returning them to lunar orbit where Orion can theoretically bring them back. It's going to make the refueling effort that much more complicated if Starship has to take care of the entire mission and not just the final stage of transporting astronauts from the lunar gateway down to the lunar surface. Now, I am confident that SpaceX will eventually be able to take care of all of these issues. I am confident that Starship will eventually completely replace SLS. However, will it replace SLS within the next 4 years when we are hoping to put human beings on the surface of the moon? moon? I really doubt it. And to make matters worse, we don't have a workable alternative to Starship when it comes to HLS, because we bypassed the best possible solution and went with Blue Origin. Now, I think the Blue Origin solution is an excellent one for the long term. It involves reusability, it involves a bigger spacecraft that, of course, is going to require refueling, but will be capable of putting larger payloads on the surface of the moon. So a very good, sustainable way of building up our presence on the lunar surface, but there's no way in hell it's going to enter service anytime sooner than the early 2030s, whereas the Alpaca probably would have been ready by 2028. And as I mentioned before, you can put the Alpaca inside the exploration upper stage of the SLS, meaning that you could, in a single mission, transport the Orion and the human landing system and the astronauts. One launch, one landing. The only additional launch that would be required is a single tanker to fuel up the Alpaca in lunar orbit. So one refueling mission as opposed to 6 to 10. It would have been a lot more straightforward. And really, I still think that this is something that NASA should be looking at. They should funnel $1 billion or so over to Dynetics to keep this project moving forward while they continue moving forward with their primary plan. If things don't work out with Starship, at least they will be most of the way towards having Alpaca in service. And there are other things that we can do to see to it that SLS can actually come in at a more reasonable price point. And this was laid out by the Office of Inspector General. Number 1, establish achievable cost-saving metrics beginning with Artemis 4 SLS elements and production contracts. Number 2, transition the core stage and exploration upper stage contracts to fixed price contracts. Number 3, if keeping contracts is cost plus, increase the percentage of cost as a factor when conducting contractor evaluations for award fees. I can't believe they haven't always been doing this. If the cost is really high, then they shouldn't get any damn bonuses. Number 4, conduct a detailed review of all contractors' submitted documents to ensure the government's rights to data and processes are not unnecessarily transferred to the contractor. Number 5, include contract flexibility on future SLS acquisitions that will allow NASA to pivot to other commercial alternatives. In other words, do a good job or we're going with Starship. Number 6, for each Artemis SLS rocket under EPOC, add compensation to the contract, such as incentive fees for when the contractor achieves specific cost-saving goals. And finally, number 7, ensure government mandatory inspection points and government oversight teams remain throughout the EPOC transition period. In other words, keep a close eye on these crooks so they don't rip us off again. Thank you very much for watching. I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all of these new Patreon members. Tarek El-Rashdi, Brian Garrison, Alan, and Toby, and Joshua Aggie, I believe, Michael Maxey, and also the fact that Robert Godez increased their membership pledge even further after they signed up. Thanks so much to all of these new members. I look forward to talking to all of you on Discord. And if you would like to contribute to improving this channel in the future, well, all the details are in the description. But more importantly, stay tuned for this fundraiser that I'm carrying out for the National Space Center in Ireland. Once again, thank you very much. And as always, stay angry about space.